Auditing in Kenya has become the subject of great focus following the release of the report of the Auditor General. Now, there's been some politics as well, with questions about the role of the Office of the Auditor General and the role of Parliament as well as how the process is undertaken. So let's break down that audit process on my explainer tonight. And first, we begin with the Constitution of Kenya, Article 229, which lays out the role of the Office of the Auditor General. This office is mandated to audit the accounts of the national and county governments, funds and authorities, courts, commissions, and independent offices, even political parties that are funded by public funds, public debt, basically any entity that is funded by public funds. And what are they looking for in the process of their audit? Well, the law is very clear as to what they're looking to see, which is whether the public funds were applied lawfully and in an effective manner. But this is done within a time frame, and one that is clear to everyone, as it is clearly spelled out in the Constitution as well. So, the auditor and the entity being audited are clear on when things must be done. Basically, the financial year for the government entities ends on the 30th of June. And this means that the reports must be ready by the 31st of December of that year. This means the clock starts ticking before December. Ideally, all the entities to be audited usually start preparing their books for auditing by September. That means they have 3 months to start preparing themselves for audit. One thing to note is that this audit process is a highly consultative one between both entities. That is, the auditor and the one being audited. Now, they speak frequently and regularly, and there is lots of back and forth during the whole process, meaning that there is no surprise with the final report. So once the auditee or the entity being audited is ready with the books, they submit them for audit by the end of day September 30th. The auditor then sets up what is called an opening conference. Others call it an inception conference. Now, present in this meeting is the chief accounting officer of the entity being audited or their representative, and of course, the auditor. Now, in this meeting, they would agree on how to proceed, documents that are required, who might need to be interviewed or consulted for further inquiries, and the timelines. There would be cooperation and acceptance of the dates. So it's basically setting out the terms of reference for the engagement. During this time, the auditor would also begin planning for the assignment. So what data would they need to gather? If they would need to do field visits, who and how will this be facilitated? The auditor would then conduct a risk assessment. They would evaluate the inherent risks and the level of materiality. We'll get to that in a moment. Essentially, they're determining also what type of discrepancies would be deemed significant. The audit takes place in 2 phases. One is pure analysis of the books. What do the accounts say, and do they add up? Do they make sense? And then there is the field work. Now, in the field work, they will be looking to verify 3 things. 1, do the projects comply with the law? Various laws that guide procurement in this country, such as public procurement law. In terms of funding, for instance, did the entity comply with the Public Finance Management Act or PFM Act and various other types of legislation that would be required? So here they're basically looking at process. For instance, in the latest report, you saw the office questioning whether certain payments or debts were incurred with the approval of the National Assembly as is required. Now, the second thing is whether the project on which public money was spent is value for money. So let's say it's a hospital. Was it actually needed in that area? In other words, has it treated many patients or just a few, say maybe 5 or 10, which may indicate that it was not a big priority for that region at that time. We've also seen cases in which a road that was constructed didn't quite meet the standards. Maybe the layer of tarmac wasn't as indicated in the books and would therefore require repairs in a very short time to come. Or did they just do some shoddy patchwork while they could have done some better recarpeting, right? Also, is that road being used to, say, transport goods from farm to market, quite often, or is it just lying idle? Finally, the other thing they're looking for in the field visits is, was there fraud? Meaning, are the transactions complete and accurate? They would cross-check the invoices. For all of these, they might need additional expertise. for example, a roads engineer or a health expert. And that depends on the type of project that is being audited. Now, it is also during this phase that they would be testing the internal controls of the system. 1, do the controls exist? 2, are they being implemented? Now, after this process of fieldwork, the auditor may still have some additional queries based on what they have seen in the field. Now, for transparency in a public audit process, the queries are put in writing, and the entity is required to respond in writing as well. This is where they might seek clarification on what may have been seen in the field and from the accounts analysis, in case there's anything that still remains unclear. Now, again, note that there is consultation here as well, so that the final report, again, does not have any surprises for the auditee or the one being audited. Now, once these clarifications have been done, the auditor then proceeds to put together what is known as a management letter. Now, that management letter contains observations of the entity or project under audit. It also has recommendations on how particularly to improve internal controls and processes. Now, the tone of this letter is not one of admonishment, but rather how the agency can improve their internal processes, how they can align better with statutory requirements, with the laws and regulations that are guiding the entity and, say, procurement processes. This letter, by the way, is provided to the management of the entity ahead of time to give them time to reflect on the recommendations in this letter and reflect upon them. Here now, that management letter is discussed, and then the management gets the opportunity to respond to those recommendations. And at this time, they can also give, that is now in the exit meeting, their views on how they plan to implement those recommendations from the management letter and over what period of time they intend to do so. They can also give their feedback on what resources or personnel they might need to implement the recommendations that have been put forward. It is at this process, at this time, then the process is over at an exit meeting. Now, an important aspect of the audit report is the opinions that are expressed by the auditor on the statements that have been provided or on the financial status of the entity under audit. Those opinions are 4. Let's start with an unqualified opinion that is typically the ideal. I'm not sure how many actually make it here. But this means that the financial statements present a true and fair view of the entity. There are no misstatements, therefore basically no issues. Then we have a qualified opinion. That means that there are certain exceptions, that the entity may not have fully complied with certain standards. However, these exceptions are not so pervasive. For example, let's take the instance of issues with the ownership of a piece of land on which, say, a school has been built, such as they don't have the title deed. However, they may be in the process of acquiring one, so that issue is being sorted. So the auditor will qualify the statements of that entity, but with some exceptions, right? Then you have the adverse opinion. Not good. This one shows that there are significant misstatements that in overall will affect the reliability of the financial statements. Here, things are not good. Lastly, there is a disclaimer. As the name suggests, if it gets here, things were not good at all. Could be a disclaimer because the auditor can't express an opinion on the books. Maybe the whole engagement was not pleasant at all, and they were not even provided with documents that they needed so as to make any determination, or that things were not done properly at all. Hardly gets here. By the time things are here, that's another matter altogether. Now, there's a few things to remember about this audit process, like we've been saying. One, that it is a highly consultative process from start to finish. More than antagonistic, it is meant to shed light on weak links that need to be improved upon to ensure that there's value for public monies spent on taxpayer-funded projects. Now, lastly, is that the Office of the Auditor General is an independent body whose mandate is clearly spelled out in the Constitution of Kenya. The document that they come up with is public record and is made public immediately they are done with it. Here is the last important step after they have completed their report, and this is spelled out as well in Article 229, which states that the audit reports shall be submitted to Parliament or the relevant county assembly, and that within 3 months after receiving an audit report, Parliament or the county assembly shall debate and consider the report and take appropriate action. Debate, consider, and taking appropriate action being the keywords here. Now, appropriate action might be maybe legislating or passing regulations that would be required to make changes in the processes to ensure that the taxpayer gets value for money. That is the audit process explained.